Hello and welcome to another Tax Talk with the Orange County Taxpayers Association. I'm Carolyn Cavecchi, CEO and President of OC Tax, and it is my pleasure to have with us today Manuel Camargo with Strategic Planning at Southern California Edison to talk with us about the decommissioning of the San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station, or SONGS. Manuel, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Carolyn.
We're pleased to have you here. Now, I grew up in Orange County in the 1960s, so I'm old, but I have very, very clear memories of the San Onofre plant. In fact, in elementary school, we were bused down there and went on field trips through the plant. And SONGS has been a part of the Orange County history really for decades now. So if you could just give us a little background on it and just some history.
Sure. So you'll be happy to know we still do tours of SONGS today. And we've had some challenges with the pandemic, but coming up in that late July timeframe, folks should be able to go to our website and sign up for a public tour on Saturdays. So still doing that. But backing up in time, so it was early 60s when we started construction on SONGS. And the first unit, Unit 1, went online in the late 60s in 1968. And then that continued for some time. In the early 80s, 1983, 1984, then Units 2 and 3 came online. By the early 90s, we had to retire the first unit, and then the two units, Units 2 and 3, the bigger units, those continued for many years. We continued to produce clean energy for many years, about 45 years altogether. And then right about 2012, we had an issue with the steam generator with one of the two units, Units 2 and 3. Had new steam generators installed, and so one of those had an issue. We had to stop the units, and by 2013 we made the decision to just retire SONGS altogether. So that was back in 2013, and so since that time it was really not a planned retirement.
Right. So I'm going to interrupt you here. And we talked before we started shooting. I am a big fan of nuclear energy. I do think it's clean. I know I'm probably in the minority, but it did affect the actual energy in the state of California and clean use of energy, right? When
That's
it went
exactly
down.
right, yeah. So in fact, what we found was that the following year, because most of the makeup for SONGS, that sort of what we call base load generation, runs all the time, day or night, whether the wind's blowing or the sun's shining or whatever. And so we did see that the emissions in California went up by about 2-3%.
Wow.
And much of that is because the offset from SONGS was used. We used gas-fired power plants in order to make up some of that power.
Interesting. So you are in the decommission process right now.
Yeah.
So where are you in the process of decommissioning SONGS?
So short story is we're about 1 year into an 8-year process of removing the above-ground structures, including the domes, the iconic domes that you see as you travel along the 5 freeway. But backing up just a little bit, so we had to go through a permitting process. So there's something called the California Environmental Quality Act.
Yes, love CEQA.
Yeah, so CEQA, and we did go through a substantial CEQA process.
Okay, I'm sure.
That started with the California State Lands Commission, and we produced an environmental impact report of the decommissioning process, right? And so that was certified by the California State Lands Commission in the spring of 2019. And then the California Coastal Commission, they jumped in after that, still as part of the CEQA process. And the Coastal Commission relied on the EIR, the Environmental Impact Report, for a coastal development permit. And then that permit was unanimously approved by the Coastal Commission in the fall of 2019. So that freed us up at SONGS to start decommissioning the plant. So we started in early 2020, and that will continue through about 2028. And again, that's removing the above ground structures, the domes and the buildings and everything else. And some of that some of those buildings are already coming down now, the administrative buildings and such. The domes, those will come down in about 2025.
Oh, interesting. Well, I'm kind of a nerd about process. And SCE has a great video. So if you don't mind, we're going to cut to a video now that actually is just a couple minutes, I think, right? It actually goes through the process of what it is going to take and what buildings are going to take to actually start decommissioning the San Onofre plant.
Once dismantlement of San Onofre nuclear plant begins, safety and environmental stewardship will guide the process every step of the way. Southern California Edison selected the team of AECOM and Energy Solutions for this project, one of the largest commercial nuclear plant decommissioning projects in the world. This animation illustrates a conceptual technical approach which will be refined during the detailed planning process. The initial demolition will focus on clearing areas of the property to facilitate staging and seamless loading and removal of debris. This demolition on the north side will also clear space for a rail spur to allow for transportation of debris, such as concrete and rebar. Next, the team will create a path down to the intake area by removing the turbine buildings, creating access to the west side of the property. After this work is complete, the buildings between the containment domes will be demolished. Temporary structures will be used during demolition to control dust and other debris. Areas within the safety, fuel, and nearby buildings will be demolished internally. In the final stage, the containment buildings will be demolished using a bottom-up technique that has proven effective in prior nuclear plant decommissioning projects. Soil materials will be used to create a level surface, the final step in fully restoring the site for unrestricted use. San Onofre's used nuclear fuel, which is regulated as high-level radioactive waste, will remain on site in a robust steel and concrete storage facility until the federal government provides an off-site facility as required. The San Onofre decommissioning team is committed to environmental stewardship and remaining engaged with the community throughout the decommissioning project.
Okay, that's great information for those in Orange County to be able to watch that and know where we are. But I'm curious, we're a taxpayer organization, who's paying for this?
Yeah, good question. So, in fact, you've already paid.
Right.
So the customers for the nuclear utility for SONGS, those customers who enjoyed that clean power for so many years, prepaid for the process to decommission. So through those contributions, right about $1.5 billion through prudent investment, we were able to grow those funds so that we had enough to be able to decommission the plant. So those funds reside in trust funds. We're no longer collecting from customers, and as we do the work, we draw down on those trust funds in order to pay a contractor to demolish the plant. And then at the end, to the extent there are funds that are left over at the end of the decommissioning process, all those funds go back to customers.
Okay.
But they've prepaid, and if there's margin left at the
Right.
end, then those funds go back to the utility customers.
Well, I think the big question everybody has now is there's spent fuel on site.
Right.
And this was a nuclear plant, and there is spent fuel on price. So let's talk about the spent fuel. So what is the process right now for containing the fuel? What's going on with it?
Got it. Yeah, so let me give a little bit of background
Okay.
first, because one of the very important things that we like to try to reinforce with folks is, what is the nature of the spent fuel itself? Because that's important. That's important when a plant is operating, and it's also important at this stage when the plant has been decommissioned. So the spent fuel is in a solid state. It's a ceramic uranium pellet.
Okay.
And those pellets, so it's ceramic format, it takes 5,000 degrees to melt the pellet. And so to put it in context, 5,000 degrees. So molten lava is about 2,000 degrees.
Okay.
The surface of the sun is about 10,000 degrees.
Okay.
So right in the middle there is about 5,000.
Okay.
So we don't have the energy at this point to be able to melt the uranium pellets.
Okay.
Right. So the fuel's been cooling since 2012. It has not been in a reactor since 2012. So that's an important differentiator. Right.
Right.
So if you've watched the Chernobyl mini-series,
Right.
it's an operating reactor. Okay. So
Okay.
we haven't been operating since 2012.
Okay.
So the first thing to know is that we really don't have the heat to be able to melt those uranium
interesting.
ceramic pellets at this
Okay.
point. So once the spent fuel has gone through a couple of cycles and it's basically used up like an old battery to some extent, then what we do is it comes out of the reactor and it's thermally hot and it's radiologically hot. That goes into cooling pools for several years, 5 to 7 years
Okay.
nominally. And then after that cooling period, the preferred mode of storage is what we call passive dry storage. So we take the fuel
Pellets.
assemblies.
Okay.
So the fuel assemblies are in a fuel rod.
Okay.
Each of the rods goes into an assembly, and those assemblies are cooled in the pool for some time. When they're cool enough, then we take those out and we put them into a stainless steel container.
Right.
We dry the spent fuel. We take out all the moisture, and then we backfill it with helium. So there's it's in a safe environment, if you will, inside the canisters, and then we weld it shut.
Okay.
And each of those canisters are very robust canisters. I should have brought a piece.
I can only imagine.
So they're 5/8 of an inch thick, stainless
steel.
Very special stainless steel, 316L L for low carbon stainless steel, because it's in a marine environment, right? So we need to be mindful of chlorides and all that. So it goes into the stainless steel canisters. Once it's in a stainless steel canister, then we put it into this dry cast storage facility. And the thing to know about that is that, again, during operations, when you have spent fuel pools or when you have fuel in a reactor, you have backup upon backup system to make sure that you keep the fuel in a safe condition. Right now, the fuel just needs to sit. It cools by convection, so it's in these sealed canisters. That's even preferable to having it in a spent fuel pool, which is, again, when it comes out of the reactor, goes into a spent fuel pool. Those spent fuel pools require backup water, they require generators, all that. So in dry storage, which is where we are now, there are no fans, there are no pumps, or what we would call active systems that are required to keep the spent fuel cool. It just sort of cools on its own. And that's the condition it'll stay in. We monitor it. We have monitoring programs, inspection programs that we adhere to per the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And our job is really to keep that spent fuel in a good condition, so that when the federal government is finally ready to come and pick it up, we're ready to give up that spent fuel.
Okay, so the public should have no concern then, especially down in the South Orange County, North San Diego County. At this point, it's not an operating nuclear power plant, so just the storage itself, it sounds like it's being done. So there doesn't seem like there's a lot of concern, should be concern then, on the public's part.
Yeah, I mean, so what I would say to that point, I mean, you can really enumerate all this. So there are 0, actually, emergency action levels in Nuclear Regulatory Commission speak. But there are no accident scenarios that would result in an off-site release of radiological contamination. 0, right, at this stage. It's very different when you had an operating reactor.
Yes.
But at this stage, when all the spent fuel is in these canisters, yeah, the local public should take comfort in the fact that it's all in these canisters. So it's in the safest condition really possible before you actually put it in a deep, geologic repository for all of time.
Which is what I want to get into now, because that's kind of the rub in all of this now. So where are you in the process? And I know this is, a big question, but where are you in the process of moving the spent fuel off-site, and what are the difficulties that you're having right now?
Yeah, there are plenty of them.
Yes.
So where are we in the process? So again, there is no facility to send the spent fuel to at this time, right? So where we are is not being satisfied with that. We developed a strategic plan, what we call, for the offsite relocation of the spent fuel. This is actually one of the projects that I helped to lead for Southern California Edison and the other co-owners of SONGS. So that was about a 2-year process. We brought in a number of leading experts, former Department of Energy executives. We have a former Nuclear Regulatory Commission chairman who we brought in to help advise us on all this. And over about a 2-year process, we developed a strategic plan to look at all the potential opportunities for getting the spent fuel off-site, assessing those, considering the unique challenges of a utility. So you asked about customers and tax and all that, right? So there's an important nuance here. Right now, the federal government is accountable to come and pick up the spent fuel from our gate and take that off-site. There are some other potential alternatives to get the spent fuel off-site, and what our experts helped us to understand is, depending on the path that we take, you could have an additional burden of more than $100 million placed on our utility customers. And that's not in the trust funds that we talked about, right? So it helped us the process of developing the strategic plan helped us to understand some of the nuances and what we need to advocate for as we work with, hopefully, Congress in order to solve this problem. So we've developed that strategic plan. We're now implementing the strategic plan. There are a number of different elements, including things that we can do on site to make sure that our spent fuel is ready to give up. And we'll be implementing that plan now for some time.
Well, so So where is the United States, the federal government, in moving towards a long-term storage of nuclear? Because obviously, SONGS isn't the only one. We're talking about another plant potentially going off-site up in Central California. There are other plants. You would say it's the federal government's responsibility.
Yes.
So could you go into a little more detail about that? So just that that they are obligated by policy, by what? That they're supposed to come.
Yes.
And if they're supposed to do it, why isn't that happening?
Okay, yeah, good, excellent question. Okay. So very simply, there's it's by law and by contract. So by law, there's a Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982, the very specific piece of legislation that requires the Department of Energy, in particular, to come and pick up the spent fuel from places like San Onofre by 1998. Okay, and that hasn't happened, right? So
wow, it's been a few years.
Yes, a
few
couple decades. Yes. So by law, Nuclear Waste Policy Act, the federal government was accountable to pick up the spent fuel, but also the Nuclear Waste Policy Act required the Department of Energy to enter what are called standard or sort of homogeneous contracts with each of the utilities that has a nuclear power plant. And so those contracts also govern the manner in which the Department of Energy was to start picking up the spent fuel. The legislation also was very specific with respect to the site. It evolved over time. The legislation was revised in 1987, and ultimately, bottom line is it designated Yucca Mountain in Nevada as the spot where the spent fuel would be permanently disposed of in the United States.
And that's the spent fuel for everybody?
Everybody,
okay.
Yes.
Isn't that kind of like putting all your eggs in one basket?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so what happened then? I hate to put you in that, but I'm really interested. Obviously, Nevada must not. Somebody got upset, or why aren't they operating it then?
Well, it's an excellent question. So going back, back in 1983, the idea was that there would be two repositories, one in the east and one in the west. Okay. And then through a political process, not really a scientific process, that
never happened. It just
never ever. Except for maybe this one little tiny instance. So through a sort of a political process, really, to my mind, when Nevada was politically weak, we went from having two repositories to just one in Yucca Mountain. Okay. And then after that, Yucca Mountain, not Yucca, but Nevada became politically strong. Yes. And said, not interested. Okay. So that's where we are right now. What I would tell you is that in 2010. The federal government pulled the plug even on Yucca Mountain. Right. And actually they disbanded the organization. So I mentioned that the Department of Energy is accountable for all this, right? There was a department within a group within the Department of Energy that was responsible for managing the process, right? The Yucca Mountain facility.
Great idea, yes.
Okay, all that was disbanded in 2010.
Okay.
The department was taken apart, so there's nobody in the federal government who goes to work every day saying, this is my job to work on this particular issue. Interesting. So that's been on ice since 2010. Yucca Mountain, who knows what will happen with that. But so what I would say is, as we move forward, so we ask where are we as a country? So there's a bright side. Okay. Right now there is about $38 million in the federal budget to start working on a program in two different manners. So there's about $20 million to start working on a federal interim repository. So not a permanent repository, so it's an interim. The concept is to take spent fuel from all the locations around the country.
Find an interim place.
And hopefully, from our perspective, selfishly from SONGS and other decommissioning sites that are no longer generating spent fuel, our thinking and the thinking of many others is that you should prioritize those decommissioning sites, right? So elsewhere in California, you have Rancho Seco up near Sacramento and Humboldt Bay, up in Northern California, where there's nothing left but the spent fuel. Right. So the idea is to take that spent fuel, consolidate it into fewer above ground repositories, sort of like the spent fuel facility that we have at SONGS, while the federal government then starts work on the big job of a permanent repository. And so there's funding in the federal budget for a federal consolidated interim storage facility to be developed. So that's good news. Bad news is nothing's really happened over the past 10, 11 years. Good news is it looks like we're headed in the right place. And the new-ish Secretary of Energy, Granholm has stated in congressional testimony that it is her intent and the Department of Energy's intent to restart that program here in the coming months. I think you know the federal government, we have some other issues at present, you know, COVID, the COVID issue, the infrastructure jobs bill, et cetera. So, but you know, hopefully we'll see sometime within the next couple of months that there's the bandwidth to start working on this issue at the federal level.
So it's in the budget. So who pays for that? Have there been some sort of monies in rates over the years that have gone into that, or is that? Oh, there has been. So the feds have been collecting money from us,
right,
to deposit that someplace, but yet they're not doing it. So
they're not spending it.
They're not spending it.
So there's something called the Nuclear Waste Fund, and similar to, you know, utility customers for SONGS prepaying for the demolition of the plant. You know, by extension, at the federal level, the way that program works is utility customers, nuclear utility customers for all nuclear utilities, paid in 1 nil, or 1/10 of 1 cent for every kilowatt hour that they consumed.
Okay.
And at present, there are about 43 billion with a B dollars in that nuclear waste fund. Okay. So much, in fact, that they've stopped collecting from nuclear customers. So it's not clear that would be enough to finish the project, but over 40 billion is certainly plenty to restart the program.
It's sitting in an account someplace in Washington.
Right. It is, and part of the challenge, so there are a number of challenges. Going back to the strategic plan that I mentioned that we developed, there are a couple of key issues. So one is the funding process. So right now, in order to draw against the nuclear waste fund, that $40+ billion, it requires annual appropriations from Congress.
Okay.
Right? So that can come and that can go. 2010, they turned off the spigot.
Right.
And that stopped the program. So one of the things that would be nice is to be able to have a situation where there is unfettered access to that $40+ billion by an entity of the federal government that's responsible for disposing of the spent fuel. Yeah. I would tell you too, you know, one of the things that would be nice too as we look at this program from a national perspective is to try to learn from the international examples that exist.
Right.
And there are a couple that I would flag. So Finland and Canada. In Finland and in Canada, they've worked on what I would call a consent-based process. So the process I described for Yucca Mountain, that was not consent, right? So I think of it as very simply almost like an RFP, a request for proposal process. Right. And that is to say, you know, you ask communities who would like to learn more, not who would like to accept necessarily, who would like to learn more about the benefits, because there could be financial benefits and other benefits of hosting a site.
Right. And you know, my idea, not that the federal government cares about my idea, but I could see designating areas, nuclear depository, a nuclear repository area, so many miles around where a depository is, and give specific federal funding, you know, jobs money, transportation money. So if that community is willing to do this, then that land is designated. I could see no federal income tax. I mean, I think you could really make an area that very attractive to a community that's maybe suffering economic downturns and stuff like that, and make it worth a community's while financially. So that's my idea. It's federal designation of depository area and give them all sorts of tax benefits.
Yeah, I think that's smart, and I think that's what we've seen at the international level with Finland and with Canada. Canada started with 22 sites, and they're down to 2 now. And those were 22 communities that said we'd like to at least think about it. Once they think about it, then you get into sort of the engineering, and do they have the right rock in that particular community?
Well, and just even earthquakes, right? You've got to look at geological things, I would imagine.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Yeah, but to your point, so we also have a domestic example that I could mention too, and that is what's called the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, which is near Carlsbad, New Mexico. Okay. So for some time, the federal government was looking for a place to store a different type of radioactive called transuranic waste. Okay. So different than commercial spent fuel. But still, they had a hard time, the federal government, finding a place a site for that for WIP, the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. And one community, Carlsbad, had previously been, you know, the economy changed is what happened. Yes. So they had previously been, potash mining was what kept the economy floating for many years.
Disappeared.
And then it disappeared, and after it disappeared, they said, well, hey, you know, we'd like to consider hosting your facility. We know how to, very simply, we know how to dig,
Yeah.
right?
Bury it
We're
in
miners.
there, yeah.
And that worked out, and now the waste isolation pilot plant exists. So the point is, I think there are examples domestically and internationally that include consent, being able to work with stakeholders and use that as a more productive path forward. And speaking of Secretary Granholm, in her congressional testimony, she actually spoke to exactly that, right? Which she, in addition to talking about restarting the program in the coming months, she also indicated that she believed that it was important to engage with Native American groups, with states, et cetera, as part of that process. I think that's smart.
Okay, so federal government likes my idea, and they find a state, and we're ready to go. So what is the process then? Is Edison responsible? So, you know, the feds just come to the door and pick it up? How is that going to get moved? And what is the process of getting it out of your area and moving it? Do we know yet? Or?
Yes. Yeah, so that's pretty clear. I should say, too, that the process of moving spent fuel, that is known. We've moved 270 spent fuel assemblies from SONGS to a facility in Illinois.
Okay.
Back before the mid-70s, before 1972. After 1972, the government put a moratorium on what was called reprocessing, really recycling spent fuel. The point is, we've shipped spent fuel. We SONGS, SCE, have shipped spent fuel. Internationally, it happens all the time. Here in the U.S., the nuclear Navy ships spent fuel all the time. So that is known. The process of getting ready to ship our spent fuel off-site, we just need some of our fuel to continue to cool, even in the canisters.
Right.
So the vast majority of our spent fuel, we have about 123 canisters, and about 100 are ready now to transport. So if there were a facility available now, we could get rid of the vast majority of our spent fuel right now. The last several canisters will continue to cool over the next several years. So that's one piece. We also have some work that we would need to do on-site, but it's pretty minimal. We already have a rail spur that extends into the site, and so we know that at least for SONGS, we would use rail in order to move the canisters off-site. The Department of Energy also is still working on special rail cars. There's something called the Atlas rail car, and there's a new one called the Fortis, F-O-R-T-I-S-S. rail car that they are developing. The Atlas rail car is already in the prototype phase. It is designed to hold the canisters of spent fuel, and they're very robust packages. They're designed so that even severe accidents would not result in a release, which is not the case with other types of things that we transport here in this country, like chlorine, for instance. So it's a type of package that would survive a crash, survive fire, submersion in water, all those types of things. So that's in development, and that's in the prototype testing. So we really need the government to provide a facility for us to send the spent fuel to. We'd be able to use the rail cars that are under development by the Department of Energy, and then again by the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. The federal government would come to our site. It would be our responsibility to provide the spent fuel in a proper condition, and the canisters that we use, that the spent fuel is already in, are designed for both on-site storage and off-site transportation.
Okay.
So they're pretty much ready to go onto a rail car and move off-site.
We just need to get them moved off-site. So what is going to happen? I know a lot of people in South Orange County are going to want to know what happens to the land after it's decommissioned. And I'm assuming the Marines are going to come back in and take possession of it, but can they do it now, or do they have to wait until everything is off? So what is that process going to look like?
Yeah, they need to, so we'll need to wait.
Okay.
I mentioned that the current deconstruction process is the above ground structures. There are some below ground structures. There's also the spent fuel storage facility. So we need to get the spent fuel off-site in order to be able to restore the land to a condition where the Marines and the Navy can use it for any purpose, right? Unrestricted use. In fact, you'd be able to, grow crops, raise cattle. This is by NRC designation. You would be able to raise cattle, eat the crops, drink water from the wells that are
Wow.
beneath. So it's that level. That's the level to which we would remediate the site, restore the site, and that's our ultimate goal to
Okay.
be able to do that. So
Okay.
that's what it requires. So we really can't accelerate that.
No.
So we really need the spent fuel to move off site,
Okay.
and then we can restore the
Okay.
land and give it back to the.
I'm assuming they're going to use it
Marines.
for training. I mean, but who knows what
Yes.
they're going to be using it for.
Yeah, so I mean, at a high level, what I would tell you is we do know from Brigadier General Conley is his name, sent us a letter in March indicating that the Navy and the Marines see that the perpetual storage of spent fuel on site at Camp Pendleton is inconsistent with their national security mission of training Marines. So they don't want to be in the business of storing spent
Right.
fuel. We'd be happy to get out of the
Right, business
business
too.
of storing spent
Yeah.
fuel. So the Marines really want the land back so that they can use it to support training.
So what can Orange County taxpayers do right now to help with this process? Because SCE's put together a fairly robust strategic plan and what
Yep.
they need to do. You've got a majority of your canisters ready to go.
Yep.
So we're obviously waiting on the federal government right now. So what can we do as taxpayers here in Orange County to come alongside you in this process and help?
Yeah, well, we'd love that help, I'll tell you. And I would think that the getting the spent fuel offsite is pretty much a shared goal for just about everybody in this local
I would
community.
think it would be a shared goal of everyone, especially
So-
South Orange County.
So one thing, I would say the one thing folks could do that would be most impactful is to join a coalition that we formed.
Okay.
We did it in partnership with Orange County Supervisor Lisa Bartlett,
Right.
San Diego County Supervisor Jim Desmond, as well as, of course, SCE, San Diego Gas and Electric, and the City of Riverside. So we joined forces and have formed this coalition called Action for Spent Fuel Solutions Now.
Okay.
And so what folks can do is join that coalition.
Okay.
What I tell you, just our experience has been, because there has been in the past years, there has been bipartisan support for legislation. Just hasn't been enough support to get it over the finish line and get
Right.
it passed. And so the last time we had the opportunity to try to get some legislation through Congress, we worked mostly as an industry, as a nuclear utility industry, to try to get that through, and it just was not adequate.
Right.
So lesson learned, we need help.
Yes.
So we've actually formed the coalition to be a very broad-based coalition with help from business, from organized labor, Native American communities, local elected officials, and anybody else
Right.
who shares our goal of getting the spent fuel off-site. So when it comes time to take action, let's say the next time we have some legislation or appropriations in front of Congress, what would be great is have the biggest, broadest voice possible. So anybody who would like to lend their voice to this, and the best way to get the spent fuel off-site is to lend your voice to this,
Okay.
join our coalition,
Okay.
and join us in trying to get this over the finish line the next time we have our opportunity.
Well, you know, on a political basis, I'm assuming that the states that have the plants being decommissioned and are looking, it's a big issue, and those that don't probably aren't thinking about it. So it is going to take, I think, at the federal level, an administration that's very interested in solving this and coming alongside the states that are waiting for the federal government to do their job, really.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. It was fascinating.
Thank you for having me. I really
Fascinating
appreciate
information. You know, for decades, San Onofre has been an iconic landmark that lets travelers know they're either entering or leaving Orange County. So over the next decade, we're going to be watching as this landmark is removed, decommissioned, and someday hopefully return to the United States Marine Corps. Thank you so much for being with us today. If you are interested in membership in the Orange County Taxpayers Association or simply information on tax policy and how to protect Proposition 13, please visit our website, octax.org, or follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at OC Taxpayers. Thank you for watching. We'll see you all next time on OC Tax Talk.